We're very happy to have you with some really special guests here today on our U.S.-Mexico relationship panel. I've got some great friends here of the foundation that I am happy to introduce to you. First off, Mark Morgan. Mark has over 30 years of law enforcement experience, including the acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the Obama administration, and was acting director of U.S. Customs Enforcement. Leading up to this, he had a 20-year career with the FBI. But the main reason that I keep inviting Mark back for these fun conversations is because, like me, he served in the Marine Corps. Wow. So Semper Fi, Mark, and welcome back. If you could please help me welcome Mark. Simon.
I've never worn fuchsia. Is that fuchsia? What is that?
I couldn't tell. It's pink. It's Wednesday, so we wear pink. Simon, over here at the end, Simon Hankinson is a senior research fellow in the Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. From 1993 to 2003, he was a foreign service officer serving in India, Fiji, Ghana, Slovakia, Togo, and Washington, D.C. And Nairobi. Prior to entering the State Department, he worked as a lawyer in London and then taught history, English, and drama at a private school in Miami. Simon, welcome, and thank you for being here with us today. Finally, here in the middle, we have Andres Martinez-Fernandez, who is the Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America at the Heritage Foundation as well, at their Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign Policy. In this role, he leads the Heritage Foundation's work on U.S. policy towards Latin America, and before joining Heritage, he was an analyst at a leading global market intelligence firm where he advised top executives from multinational companies on political and macroeconomic risks in Latin America. Prior to that, he was a researcher at the American Enterprise, and he also worked as a consultant on the Organization of the American States and political groups in Latin America. Andres, thank you for joining us today. So we've got a great panel here, a lot of information that they're going to share, so let's just dive right into that. Mark, I'm going to start with you. Anyone who's listened to you speak knows that you'll say over the past 30 years, you've seen presidents take increasing steps to secure the border, whether that be building infrastructure, supporting law enforcement, border patrol. But obviously, something has changed over these last few years because we've seen records in apprehensions, fentanyl seizures, weapons, you name it, gotaways from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 23, and that number continues to grow. So can you tell us what has changed from the U.S. federal government from when you started your career in law enforcement to today that's led to this disaster?
Everything, right? Look, I'm not trying to be facetious, but let's back up a little bit too, because I think it's very important. When we look at Mexico right now, I think we need to be honest, and we need to be honest when we're talking about the national security risk, but also the economy issues as well. Mexico right now, they're not a legitimate partner, and I believe we need to stop looking at them as a legitimate partner across the board, right? Last year, 112,000 Americans died from drug overdose and fentanyl. Right now, illegal immigration costs this country $180 billion. Right? We know in Texas alone, from 2011 to 2022, 287,000 illegal aliens committed over 400,000 crimes, including thousands of homicides, kidnappings, and thousands of sexual assaults in the state of Texas alone. We know the last 34 months, 2,000 migrants died at our border, recovered by CBP alone, not including those that died in Mexico or those that died in the Darien Gap. We know that 30% of young women and children are sexually assaulted on their journey up here. We know even after illegal aliens making the way in the United States, that many of them are thrust into life of labor or sex trafficking. The only thing that Mexico, so when we talk about, oh yeah, it's okay, Mexico, you know, they care about, no. They're not a legitimate partner right now. And the one thing that we did under the Trump administration, set aside, this is just reality fact. I was there, I was on the front line. Where's Rodney? Rodney, you here? He stepped out. I was gonna call him up too. He can support this or not. But look, here's the first thing that we did, right, in the Trump administration, is we looked at Mexico and we said, and we were honest, they're not legitimate partners, right? But yet we have developed this reliance on both countries on the economic side. So that's undeniable. I got that. I'm not denying that, right? So one thing I'll say, part of our long-term strategy, maybe we should start to rely less on our economy with Mexico, right? Because we're talking about, Texas Public Policy did a great analysis where they said we should call the cartels a terrorist organization, right? But yet we're partners with a nation that harbors and sponsors what we say is a terrorist organization. On what planet does that make sense? That we're looking to a nation that we say is harboring, facilitating, and profiting from what we want to call a terrorist organization, but we're actually going to call them a legitimate partner? I think that's insanity. So one of the first things that we did on the Trump administration, we woke up and we came from a position of honesty, leverage, and strength. And we said, Mexico, you're going to step up and address this as a regional crisis that it is. You're going to do your part. And if not, then we're not going to wait for you to do our job to secure our border. We're going to take unilateral action. And I know you all remember what that was, right? It was one tweet from President Trump, tariffs, right? Shockingly, I was there. Literally overnight, it dramatically changed. The entire landscape changed on a multi-level. One, from a Mexico border security strategy from a resource standpoint. At one point at the height, they had over 20,000 personnel, all of a sudden out of blue, dedicated to their own border security. They started securing their southern border that they shared with Guatemala. They ramped up interior enforcement, right? Instead of letting buses literally working with activists and facilitating buses going from Guatemala, from their southern border, all the way up to our border, that stopped. Caravans. Shocker, they stepped up. Unprecedented level of cooperation from a resource perspective. Then, from a policy perspective, the Remain in Mexico program, never done in history. One of the biggest things that we had to take away from bad law, the Florida Settlement Agreement, Judge G is the worst judge in American history. She single-handedly created a decision that would devastate our ability to actually secure our border by reducing illegal immigration. But what we said was, because this is what happened, come to our border, especially if you're family, that's your Willy Wonka ticket, right? Released in the United States, and so more came. The Remain in Mexico program, that program single-handedly cut off the one thing that they wanted, and that was to be released in the United States. And Mexico supported it. And it was a lot. They put a monumental level of resources into supporting the Remain in Mexico program. Facilities on their side, the coordination daily, going back and forth to courts. And by February of 2020, illegal immigration had been reduced by 85%. And here's the key that a lot of people don't realize. We only enrolled about 65,000 people in the Remain in Mexico program. And so a lot of people say, well, see, Mark, you hardly put anybody in it. It really wasn't that effective. I said, yeah, except you forgot. 600,000 less came, right? Because they knew they weren't going to be released. It was instrumental. And then, by that time, remember, so COVID was coming in 2020. And so we had already set up this incredible system and this incredible coordination with Mexico through the Remain in Mexico program. And so then when we instituted Title 42, it was an easy shift. Think about it. At that time, basically anybody that was illegally entering our border, we were simply right on the border, turning them back around. And Mexico was full partners on that. So we actually came from a position of strength. We leveraged that. We recognized the importance of the economy to both nations, but especially their nations. And we leveraged that, and we forced them and drove them to stand up as the regional partners that they would. And it also had outreach beyond just Mexico. All three Northern Triangle countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, all of a sudden, they started getting pressure. Guess who was putting pressure on them? Mexico, right? Mexico was like, hey, we're doing our part. You start doing your part. Stop them from coming across the Guatemala-Mexico border. Shocker. That never happened before, but it was happening now. The asylum cooperative agreements. We started with Guatemala, and then by the end, we had all three Northern Triangle countries. We were actually flying people that transited through Guatemala, which said, I'm a safe third country, and they were coming to our border. We were saying, nope, you're going right back to Guatemala. And Guatemala was receiving them. And I was there, and all the BS about all the facilities are not good, it was all a bunch of lies. I was there. I actually watched planes. I actually watched the facilities. I saw them. I saw the busloads we were bringing back and how they were being processed, how they actually had a center in one of the facilities trying to find them jobs. They were feeding them the whole 9 yards. USAID was involved, ICE was involved, State Department was involved. We a tremendous amount of funding and resources that went into helping all 3 Northern Triangle countries to implement the ACAs. It was working. It was working. When I was a commissioner, I'll shut up here. So when I was a commissioner, at the end, I remember I had the screen in my office every day, every minute. The numbers were updating. Rodney hated it because I was watching it constantly, and so I was always calling him, right, as the numbers would change. He'd be like, "Mark, stop! You can't call me every 5 minutes when the numbers change." But I still remember this day, because remember when Secretary Jay Johnson under the Obama administration, remember when he said 1,000 a day is a bad day? Remember that? 1,000 a day. I just got the stats. We're still at 6,000 a day right now. 1,000 a day. And that became kind of the test, you know? And I remember sitting the commissioner the day in the beginning of 2020, when I looked up and I saw the number, it was 800. We had broken the 1,000. We hadn't been there in a very long time. And guess what else? Unaccompanied minors. I'll never forget it. The number for a day dropped to 8. 8 in a day. In the past 34 months, we've had 340,000 unaccompanied minors come to our border. 340,000 kids that self-separated from their own families made that decision because this administration has said, if you get to our border, we're going to let you in, never to be heard from again. So what changed is all of that. On day one, our country jettisoned the leverage that we had, that we came from a position of strength. The Remain in Mexico program, the single-handedly most important policy that we had in place that took away one of the most important incentives. That means we ended catch and release. You will no longer be released. And every time you do that, the flow of illegal immigration will go down. More border patrol agents will get back on the front line to do their law enforcement and national security mission, and our country's more safe. This administration on day one ended that. Ended that. Remain in Mexico program, gone. The Asylum Safe Third Country agreements, gone. All of it. And so Mexico went right back to where they were. And that's where we're at right now. Literally facilitating caravans. We're literally putting people on trains, letting them come up. Putting them on buses, letting them come up. Literally standing by as our border is wide open. So that's why I say everything changed. This administration took the most secure border in our lifetime, and they intentionally unsecured it. And this country better wake up. Right now, with everything going on in the Middle East war, taught us 2 things. One, global terrorism is alive and well. And the same Islamic extremists that carried out the attacks in Israel want to do harm to our country. And 2, was a colossal intelligence failure. And if you think that our United States intelligence is infallible, we're living in a dream world. It's the best in the world, but we're not infallible. I'll leave with this and I will shut up. So 1.7 million known gotaways in the past. That's another thing that's changed, right? Gotaways. 1.7 million known gotaways in the past 34 months. I'd like to ask our intelligence community 3 questions. 3 questions. How many illegal aliens on the FBI's terror watch list are among the 1.7 million known gotaways? Their answer, they don't know. How many special interest aliens that we know come from countries that sponsor, facilitate, and harbor terrorism are among the 1.7 million known gotaways? Answer, they don't know. Can you guarantee me, U.S. intelligence community, that a sleeper cell didn't come in along with the 1.7 million known gotaways and are in the country right now planning this terrorist attack? Can you tell us that's not happening? Our intelligence community, the answer, don't know. So everything changed, and it changed for the worst.
Well, that concludes our panel for today. Thank you for coming. No, Simon, I'll kick it over to you. What Mark was saying about Remain in Mexico, you said only 65,000 people actually came through with that program. Well, now we have a very different sort of visa program that this administration has put in place. I want to quote something that you wrote recently. Biden has allowed more illegal aliens to enter the U.S. in his 2 years in office than we've welcomed actual refugees in 42 years. There is no sign of this flood ending. In fact, Biden's DHS is ramping up its parole programs, which, despite the clever spin of calling them lawful pathways, are not specifically permitted or funded in our actual laws. So this idea of legal pathways that we're seeing today, every time someone in this administration testifies before Congress, they say, well, we just want to extend the legal pathways, which we know those are not legal pathways. So can you talk to us, you've written a lot about this topic, what are these new legal, not legal pathways, and how is the federal government using those to just bring in more people?
Sure. Well, let me start with a quick analogy. We've got a lot of places in DC, our big cities, where there's a shoplifting problem, right? People are coming in, they're cleaning out the CVS. So there are three things you can do. One, you can prosecute people who steal, right? Shoplifters. That's not happening because of a whole different question of rogue prosecutors and ideology. Two, you can lock up the valuables, lock up the batteries and the shampoo, whatever it is that people are stealing. Three, the dumbest thing that you wouldn't do is you can hurriedly restock the shelves with all the valuables as quickly as possible. That's what the Biden administration is doing with immigration. That is their strategy. Rather than deterring and detaining and deporting people, they're processing them, paroling them, and punting them into the interior. Not many of them stay in Texas, which is fortunate for Texas. They go to Chicago, they go to New York, but they do cause incredible costs. And parole is the little magic trick that they found to take care of this. Parole is meant to be, it is in the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's meant to be used for significant public benefit and humanitarian reasons. And Congress clarified that in 1996 because they wanted to make sure it wasn't used as a backdoor refugee program. But this administration has just chosen to completely ignore that. And instead of a couple hundred cases a year, they're using it en masse for entire countries, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and amazingly, Mexico. 55,000 people from Mexico were paroled in on the assumption that they're then going to claim asylum. But we know that 6 or 7% of Mexicans do not qualify for asylum because Mexico, despite its problems, has plenty of places you can go and be safe. So this whole thing is a house of cards, and I'll give a shout out to Texas. Texas has yet again sued the federal government, along with I think 25 other states, to just call this out for what it is. It's utter garbage. These are not lawful pathways. They're made up, but this is their strategy. They do something that they know is illegal, like student loan giveaways or this, and then they just wait to get sued and hope they get away with it long enough. And so far, they have gotten away with it for 500,000 people in 2.5 years.
So these people that are coming in and they're being paroled, they're getting the notice to disappear, as we like to call them, for 2027, 2028. About how many people right now are on that list have been paroled in what this administration is saying legally?
It's really difficult to tell because CBP, DHS does not like to reveal these statistics. There was a good report out last week, I think, that said it was something like 266,000 people paroled under the kind of front hand program that they've been talking about, but then like another 200,000 on the back end in a program including these Mexicans and like 5,000 Russians and people from a whole bunch of countries that have either active terrorist groups or are not our friends, including a couple European countries, bizarrely, where people are supposed to not need visas. So if I had to guess, I'd say 500,000. But the scary thing is this is an open door that they've pushed on. If they can do parole for Mexico illegally, well, why not the Philippines or India or you just name a country, China? There was a line I read yesterday of President Carter talking about human rights with Chairman Mao and trying to pressure him. And Chairman Mao said, well, you said you want Chinese to be able to leave the country freely. How many would you like? And apparently that shut Carter up. If this isn't a blank check and it's unlimited, the number of people that could benefit from these made-up parole programs is theoretically infinite.
So it sounds like we're just going to keep paroling more and more people and not even really know who they are. Like was said on the last panel, if you come in and you turn in a name, it doesn't necessarily have to be your name. Welcome to America. Here's your new name. Nice. Well, Andres, I'm going to shift over to you, and I want to shift over a little bit into the criminal aspect that the federal government is facing in Mexico. We have a lot of research, and my colleagues Josh and Melissa talk often on their Hard Country podcast about the cartel organizations, what's going on down there, and how AMLO, the president in Mexico, has made it more difficult for U.S. to crack down on cartel operations within the country, specifically for the DEA. So we've seen high-level U.S. officials going down to Mexico, I think 3 times now, and they come back with all this optimism. We're making all these changes. We have agreements made. We don't really see anything that comes of those agreements. So do you feel optimistic that the U.S. will be able to crack down on those organizations, and is anything really coming out of those high-level security talks that they're having?
Thanks. No, I mean, I think your colleagues are right to be pessimistic about the situation on security cooperation. It's if you want to understand the state of U.S.-Mexico security cooperation, you just have to know that at this last high-level security dialogue, next to Anthony Blinken and all these high-level officials, the Mexican Minister of Interior denied that fentanyl was being produced in Mexico. You know, if we can't even have the starting point of recognition of the issue, you know, how are we going to tackle this huge challenge, which is both on the U.S. and Mexico side, there's insufficient action on this front. But in particular in Mexico, you know, we're seeing it's the degradation of security cooperation over the past few years is extremely worrying. We talked about the DEA presence, extremely limited, particularly following the arrest of the former Minister of Defense, Salvador Cienfuegos. That unleashed a wave of backlash on the Mexican side as far as targeting DEA operations. And since then, we haven't really recovered even the previous level of very problematic security cooperation. We have standing offer, for example, for bolstering port security in Mexico to identify with technology and different expertise the inflow of precursor chemicals, which has been on the table and ignored. We have a cooperation as far as operation and intelligence sharing, which is minimal and certainly nowhere near the task required to combat what is a continually increasing inflow. We had fentanyl interdictions for this fiscal year, double the previous fiscal year, and triple the year before that. So the challenge is continuing to increase, and the cooperation is non-existent. One of the big issues that I see at the heart of this is corruption in Mexico. I think it's as we were just saying, the partner is not up to the task at this point. We mentioned Salvador Cienfuegos. He's the former Minister of Defense, arrested for working with cartels to facilitate narco trafficking to the United States. He's not the only high-level official that we've had arrested, and he wasn't under the current government. He was a previous Minister of Defense. So we have this kind of perennial corruption, which is growing within Mexico, which leaves us without partners that are reliable in confronting this task. And then at the same time, the U.S. is not pushing on this issue. There's these high-level dialogues that go on. It's very much for show, I think, primarily, because what ends up happening is at the end of the day, we have the ministers saying, well, we don't even produce fentanyl, and then everyone goes home. But in terms of actually increasing cooperation, we're not seeing that, and we're seeing the consequences here in the United States with tens of thousands dead.
If I could jump in there real quick. First, is that on? Am I on? Yeah. So first of all, agree. 20 years in the FBI, especially in charge of the El Paso division. From my office window, I can see Juarez. So, know a few things about the cartels. Here's what I can tell you. For 35 years, the United States government has approached the cartels with the same traditional criminal enterprise theory of investigation. And for 35 years, it's been a colossal failure, right? We, the United States, have to fundamentally change how we go after the cartels. Now, again, there's a lot of debate and discussion whether we should formally call them a terrorist organization. There's pros and cons for that. That's for another discussion. But here's what is absolutely correct, and I say I subscribe to the Bill Barr theory, is we need to go after we need to fundamentally change how we go after the cartels. We need to go after them with the same level of commitment, tenacity, whole of government strategy that we do a terrorist organization. Who cares what you call them? The best would be a Plan Colombia, where we work with it, right? They went after FARC. It was very successful. It'd be great. We work with Mexico. We devastate the cartels. We defeat the cartels. We let Mexico be the only ones at the podium and take credit. That's great. But the last time I checked, we don't need the permission from another country to protect our own country. And to footstomp what you said, we know, our intelligence, we know where all the ports of entry are, where all the precursor chemicals that come from China and Mexico. We know where they're at. We know where every super meth lab is in Mexico. We know every single cartel. We know where their strongholds are. We know the routes. We know everything. So why do we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again? Even if we get a conservative back in the White House and we fundamentally shift policies 180 degrees, right? And we have America First policies and we put the resources down there, right? Infrastructure, technology, and personnel, along with that second part of the multi-level strategy of policy that actually has laws that allows those on our front lines to protect our borders. Even if we have all of that, we bring it all back to we under the Trump administration, we will never have a secure border until we defeat the cartels. Their ability to change their TTPs, their tactics, techniques, and procedures, they could rival a 500 Fortune company. They could teach a business school at Yale or Harvard at business resiliency and flexibility. Every time we change, every time we identify one of their tactics and techniques, they change it. They're going to use the air, ground, and sea. They're doing it now. The cartels just developed a drone unit, a tactical drone unit that would rival many nations' capabilities. So at the end of the day, I agree. All this going down there, it's all photo ops, it's all shows. This administration, they keep saying, oh yeah, we're going to get really tough on going after traffickers. How stupid, right? And you're like, wait a minute, Mark, that's a good thing, right? No, what do we learn from 9/11? We have to shift from a reactive, right, law enforcement mindset and go to a threat-based, intelligence-driven, proactive, preventative measure. You don't react after the traffic has already happened. You prevent the traffic from happening. That's the goal. And how do you do that? Secure our damn border, right? De-incentivize it. Stop the flow from coming. That's how you stop it. And until we change fundamentally as a United States, how are we going after the cartels? Because at the end of the day, here's what we transitioned from Mexico. At one point, they didn't have the political will. They're corrupt, failed narco state in many areas, right? They were just corrupt. They didn't have the political will. They weren't honest partners, never have been. But now it's beyond that. Because now, not only do they not have the political will to defeat the cartels, they don't have the capacity to do it now. It's the worst it's ever been. The only thing that's happened in the past 35 years of cartels, they've gotten more powerful, stronger, more influential, and their bank accounts have grown, and their business has gone worldwide. We have to shift.
With that, Mark, what you just said about how their business has grown, we hear a lot now that the cartels are not just drug traffickers, they're not just human traffickers. This is a multi-billion-dollar business that's growing every week, every month, every year, especially under this administration. Andres, you've written extensively on dismantling those financial institutions that the cartels are building up, how you think that should happen in Mexico. But I'm curious, do you see that the U.S. is doing anything to dismantle cartel funding and the financial institutions that they're building in Mexico?
Not nearly enough. And to understand the scope of illicit financial networks, it's to really see the level of the challenge that we face, because these aren't banks in Mexico that are isolated. This is financial transactions that occur in Mexico. They're mirrored in China, and you have money flowing across the world within seconds, and that's continually reinforcing and facilitating all the illicit activity, from drug trafficking to extortion to migrant smuggling. All of this is not nearly to the level where it needs to be, and I think that's one of the big failings. We shifted a lot of our financial intelligence capabilities towards terrorism after 9/11, and that was extremely important. But the result was that we took a lot of that away from the focus on drug traffickers, and all that time we've seen them bolster their capabilities to expand their operations, expand the financial complexities of their networks, and we still haven't returned that focus towards this increasing threat that we're seeing, particularly within our own hemisphere. That's one of the big failings that we have, and one of the things that we still have not remedied, and we need to do that immediately.
Thank you for that. I want to shift over to the humanitarian aspect of what's happening at the border and how the federal government and the Mexican government are responding to that. We hear a lot of times that Mexico will say, well, it's not humanitarian, you're anti-immigrant, you're anti-this. If you try to put barriers along our border, we want you to respect our sovereignty and respect the people that just want amnesty. But really, we've seen how that's turned over millions of people to cartel human smuggling. They become victims of assault, rape, what have you, no matter who they are, how old they are. So can you talk about how, Mark, I'll let you handle this one first, with everything that the state of Texas might do to secure the border, with everything that the federal government might do or not do, how is it humanitarian and better for the people that want to come across if we put those in place?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest lies. Secretary Mayorkas, it's hard to keep track. I always say, you know how Secretary Mayorkas is lying? His lips are moving, right? It's really hard for me to keep up with all the lies that Secretary Mayorkas says. One of the biggest ones is he's developed a safe, orderly, and humane illegal immigration process, right? First of all, it's an oxymoron, and it's just a lie. And there's a couple of gentlemen right back there, Mike and Banks and Rodney Scott, who lived this, right? They interview people, and I've talked to countless Border Patrol agents whose lives will never be the same. And I've talked to some guys that are pretty tough, and women pretty tough on the front lines. And as they're talking to me, their eyes start to well up as they talk to a 14-year-old that was raped multiple times on the journey up here. Tom Holman, another great patriot. It's been probably 15, 16 years since he opened the back of a tractor trailer and saw it filled with dead bodies, including children. And he's about as tough as they come. And to this day, when he talks about it, he still wells up, chokes up. And it's hard for him to get through. Their lives will never be the same. How many times did the mainstream media talk about that, right? Or how about the sheriff deputy that said the 12-year-old emptied her backpack and a bag of pills fell out? He said, what's this? Morning after pill. From my mother, because she was assuming that I was going to be raped on the journey up here. Or the story of another sheriff that said, I was talking to a woman and she told me how she'd been raped multiple times, and one time she was pulled away. And when they brought her back after she'd been raped multiple times, there was another female in their group that wasn't there. And a couple minutes later, she heard a gunshot. A couple of smugglers came back and said, "Vámonos, let's go." That woman never returned. I mean, these stories on and on and on. We could talk for the next 10 hours for this. But you never hear about that. Never. I said before, the last 34 months, 2,000 dead migrants. There's a war in the Middle East going on right now, which I fully support, and 1,400 died. 2,000 dead migrants. When's the last time anybody on the mainstream media said that number? Never. Never. Or what about non-government organization, Doctors Without Borders said 30% of young women and children are sexually assaulted and raped on the journey up here, right? Never mentioned. Or after they get here, and everybody here knows how it works. Hey, it's $8,000 to smuggle you across. I only have $4,000. No problem. Once you get you across, you can work it. You can pay us later, right? They get here. A week later, knock on the hotel door. Where's the $4,000? I don't have it. No problem. Here's how you're going to pay it off. The life of labor and sex trafficking begins. This administration right now, conservatively, said 340,000 UACs, somewhere between 85 to 100,000 unaccompanied minors they've lost track of. They don't even know where they are. But we know where some of them are because it's been reported, right? 12-year-old working at midnight shift at a meatpacking plant cleaning up entrails, right? There is nothing humane with an open border. We know that as they're exploited and assaulted, they're kept in overcrowded, unsanitary stash houses. They're literally treated like animals. They're a commodity. 20 pounds of marijuana or 20 illegal aliens is the same to the cartels. I mean, this is absurd what we're doing right now. Our compassion has been hijacked. If you actually care about migrants, if you truly care about migrants and not your ideology, not your political talking points, you'll secure our damn border. Right now, think about it. In the last 34 months, 7.7 million total nationwide encounters. 7.7 million total nationwide encounters. 1.7 million total known gotaways in 34 months. Think about how many more young kids and women were raped because of this administration. Think about how many more women and young kids are thrust into the life of trafficking. Unaccompanied minors, you know what the average age of unaccompanied minor, the 340,000 coming across? 15 to 17. You know what the average age of people being trafficked in the United States? 15. What are we doing? There's no downside to securing our borders. Migrants' lives will be saved, and American lives will be saved. That's why Secretary Marcus should be impeached.
Well, you hit the nail on the head with talking about that humanitarian aspect. Simon, I want to shift it back to you. You've lived in multiple other countries. You've seen how other countries might handle sort of different types of migration flows, specifically in London. I'm curious if you could tell us, with what you're seeing in the United States today and what you've experienced in the other countries that you've served in, are you seeing the same types of patterns that we see all over social media of, France, Britain, where you've got just tons of people coming in, changing the culture, illegally entering? What are the differences and the similarities between those situations here and in Europe?
Well, I think the one great similarity is that we are both kind of being held hostage to these commitments that we made in the 50s. When it was a different world. You had Jews fleeing Nazis, you had dissidents fleeing communism, and so the refugee system that we currently have was set up for that. It was not designed for millions of people who are on the move because their governments are terrible, because their economies are going down the tubes, because they've depleted their farmland and various other things that are completely outside of our ability to help. And so Europeans are now, you're finding that parties that are in favor of controlling immigration are winning more elections and more seats because they realize that ultimately who gets to decide who comes in their countries? It's them, right? Like, I get to pick who comes into my house. People don't have a human right to move into my house any more than they have a human right to come into this building and help themselves to a free taco. And I think for the last 50 years, essentially, we've been over a barrel and accepting that other people have the right to bum rush our borders, and they get to pick who comes. Now, I don't consider them all bad people. They're probably, the vast majority just regular Joes who are trying to get ahead, and they're taking advantage of this wide open system in the United States and in Europe. That's not going to stop. You can't blame them for trying. But ultimately, Europe and the United States get to determine who comes in and under what conditions. And those conditions should be numbers that are manageable, of populations that are assimilable in a reasonable time, that are to serve our labor needs and not their labor needs. So I think this is, people are waking up to this. The horrific Hamas attacks that Mark alluded to are one, the latest piece of evidence that our societies are split down some ideological lines, and that we have to work harder to make sure that people at least share some very common values about freedom of speech, and what we value and what we hold dear. And I think we failed to do that in the United States in the last 2.5 years, and we need to put it back on track.
Real quick, so here's another thing we need to do. We need to shift the narrative. Illegal immigration is not a victimless crime, right? And I'm not saying I disagree a little bit, but I do blame someone that is going to conspire with the cartels to knowingly and intentionally violate the rule of law, our sovereignty as a nation, and illegally enter the United States. I do blame them. I do. Because we have a legal process. Now, look, we can have a separate discussion. Should we improve our legal immigration process? It can be cumbersome. Yeah, I'm all in. That's a separate conversation. That's not what's happening at our border. What happened at our border is about border security. It's not about immigration. But that's what the other side wants you to believe. They've removed the illegal part from immigration. It's all immigration, right? You're a non-citizen, right? Whether you illegally enter the border or legally come through waiting for asylum, you're not a citizen. It's all the same. They've erased the term illegal from illegal immigration, as if there's no downside to illegal immigration. We have to take back that narrative. We have to refuse to allow our compassion to be hijacked, right? No, there is a downside. When you have millions coming across, as Mike explained before, the cartels use it as an intentional distraction. They use the migrants to distract the Border Patrol so that they're engaged, and zones A and C to the right and left are wide open. Drugs, criminals, national security threats are pouring across every single day. There is a downside to illegal immigration, and we need to take that narrative back, and we need to say, no, this is not about immigration. And that's another thing, too, locally. If you ever do a poll, you're involved in a poll, please don't call it immigration. Stop. Call it border security, right? Every single time there's a poll about border security, the numbers go up in our favor. When you talk about immigration, the polls go down against our favor, right? Because we're falling into that trap, making it about immigration. Because, right, if they make what's happening at the border about immigration and you're against what's happening at the border, you're against immigration. And then you're against brown people and you're racist. That's the narrative. We got to take back that narrative.
I'm going to shift the conversation back into something you each touched on recently, fentanyl. That's a big topic when it comes to what's going on in Mexico and how can the U.S. combat that. And the big flow that we're seeing come across is masking a lot of the fentanyl that's coming in because we don't have the capabilities to find all of it. But specifically in 2023 alone, Border Patrol said they had caught enough fentanyl in between ports of entry to kill the entire U.S. population. Texas law enforcement under Operation Lone Star has caught over 400 million lethal doses of fentanyl, so clearly this is a problem. But if one of you, whoever wants to take on this one, what shifted in Mexico that allowed for fentanyl to become what it's become today, this powerhouse coming from across our southern border?
Yeah, I could start. I mean, I think simply the criminal infrastructure was there and ready to adapt to the rise of fentanyl, reacting to some of the domestic issues here we had with prescription opioids, and they've adapted very quickly to that opportunity, criminal opportunity, and expanded that very aggressively. And that's what you can do when you have control over huge swaths of territory, these networks of illicit financial flows that go across the world, and easy access across the border. This is now become the fentanyl issue is what has refocused a lot of U.S. concern on the cartels and on drugs, and you see the reaction within the Republican debates. We talk about military action, but beyond that, you even see that across, in the Senate. There was a recent hearing, and you could see even the Democrats very exasperated with Mexico as a partner on fentanyl in particular, and the lack of cooperation. So this is something that is increasingly at the fore as far as our focus on transnational organized crime. The issue is that it's coming now at a time where migration is also skyrocketing. So the U.S. is faced with very difficult balancing act as far as combating, particularly in our cooperation with Mexico and some of these other countries, combating the flow of migrants and combating the flow of fentanyl and the growth of transnational organized crime. Because what we see in Mexico is you get a lot of pushback when it comes to how they handle the drug war, how they handle, don't tell us how to do it. We're going to handle that. A lot of that stems in corruption. and a lot of that also nationalism. And then you get the threats as far as when we take action, such as the arrest of corrupt officials like Cienfuegos, about dismantling some of the cooperation on migration. So a lot of this is a very difficult situation that we're confronted with. But the reality is that the U.S. has taken its foot off the pedal as far as combating the flow of fentanyl and transnational organized crime in these last few years, as this rising flow of migration has also skyrocketed. So that's also something that has permitted this crisis to get to the levels that we're seeing.
And I'll also say, I think it's another example to show that Mexico is not a legitimate partner, right? So AMLO says it's our fault because of our insatiable appetite, right? I mean, literally. I mean, he's living in an alternate universe that he takes no responsibility. I mean, it's absurd. And we know, and the second thing is, it shows, to your point, just how powerful the cartels are. They saw that, because originally, where was fentanyl coming from? China. Their international mail and express consignment, right? It was coming. And the cartel said, whoa, that's pretty cool, right? That's a good profit. And as soon as we started locking that down, and we did a pretty good job, CBP, the government did a pretty good job. Now, I'm not saying it's 100%, but we all shut down the fentanyl coming direct from China through international mail and express consignment. We did a pretty darn good job. So Mexico's like, cartels, we can get involved in that. Start a relationship directly with China now. Precursor chemicals coming directly from China. They're making their own. They hired their own chemists. They learned to make their own synthetic drugs laced with fentanyl. And why has it happened? Why is there such a growth? Because it's easy to make, it's cheap, and it's a better high than heroin. It's a perfect business model, right? And the cartels, that just shows you how tremendously effective and powerful and capable the cartels are. They are a global organization, and again, we need to wake up. And the other thing too, and I'll end with this part: our narrative, right? We suck at the narrative, right? We keep talking about programs here in the United States, right? So okay, we'll have vending machines with Narcan and et cetera, right? We talk about all these programs here, and look, I'm not saying we don't need programs, but Rebecca, she did a great job. She's a congressional testimony. She had 2 sons under the age of 14 that took what they thought was a harmless Percocet or Adderall and was laced with fentanyl, and they died. And we were at a Lost Voice of Fentanyl in D.C. a couple months ago. And I talked to her because during a congressional testimony, there's an individual from the Cato Institute, which was just what he was saying was just idiotic, right? And he said, he was talking about the insatiable appetite of drugs in this country, right? Like literally providing AMLO as talking points, right? Like it's all our fault. But she looked to him with a tear running down her face. She just slammed him. She goes, let me make something clear. My 2 sons didn't have an insatiable appetite for fentanyl, right? They thought it was something else, but it was laced with fentanyl unbeknownst to them. The majority of deaths right now, 18 to 45, is fentanyl, and the majority of those deaths, they're being taken by somebody who had no idea that what they were taking was laced with fentanyl. That is not a drug addict. That is not intentional. That's an unintentional poisoning. And so we have to change that narrative and take back that narrative too, because there's this moniker that somebody dies from drugs. Oh, you're this drug addict, you're this loser, et cetera, et cetera. No, that's not what fentanyl is all about. And then I'll go back to, we have to change that. We have to go to the cartels. This is never going to end.
I just would say that overall, these 2 problems, immigration, drugs, are about supply and demand. And you have to decide, where do you have control? Where can you attack? And when it comes to immigration, we control the supply. What do aliens want? They want to come in, they want to work, they want to send money home, they want to bring their families in. So using remain in Mexico, using safe third country agreements, using deportation and deterrence, we can control the supply. When it comes to drugs, where's the supply? It's on the other side of the border. So as Mark was saying earlier, we have to attack the supply. And we have to go after the people who are making this, who are shipping it, who are bringing it in, and the politicians who are getting rich off it.
Well said.
Thank you, gentlemen, for all of those answers. I do have one final remark that I'm going to ask of you to make, but before that, I want to kick it over to our audience for some questions. If anybody has anything, please take advantage of asking these guys what you want to know.
first, thank you for being here. You evidently have some really solid answers to our issue with the border. I think that y'all will agree with me and everybody here that enough is enough. Enough is enough. We cannot keep playing nicely. Our governor has every right here in Texas to defend our borders, and we can choose what that is. Is it fentanyl? Is it crime in Texas? Is it the destruction of Texas? At what point do you feel that our state here, or our country, because the country's not going to happen right now. We can't wait for them. We can't even blame it on them anymore. Once they don't do it, it then goes to the state, and the state has the right to do everything within the power to fix this. What would you say right now to our governor first, our other leaders that are talking about this? I know trade's an issue, but heaven forbid the amount of money that we're going to spend on illegals and the destruction of our schools and hospitals and infrastructure. I know that money's important. However, let's put that aside and look at the lives and futures of the children that are being killed, the people that are being sold into slavery here in the United States, and how and what would you say if they listen to you on how to fix this?
Mark, we know your answer, so.
So, I think it's something that's been alluded to, but I think we need to start using U.S. power, economic power, as a tool to push action on the part of Mexico, because it's very clear that it's an issue of inaction in Mexico, which has allowed the situation to get where it is. So I think we've seen how Mexico comes to the table when we start to threaten tariffs. We saw that with the USMCA process. I think that's an important. We need to link those economic issues to our national security issues and immigration issues. The other way U.S. economic power needs to be leveraged is with a more aggressive sanctions policies. I think there's really an inadequate focus on sanctioning corrupt officials in Mexico. We've seen in other parts of Latin America, the administration is very happy to sanction a bunch of officials that take bribes for a port or a road, and it's a problematic policy because of many reasons. But for whatever reason in Mexico, we have really held off on really aggressively sanctioning, calling out a lot of these officials, security officials, and elected officials that are very actively involved in supporting the flow of drugs to the United States. So I think in those two ways, leveraging U.S. economic power would be the most important way that we can shift the status quo on drugs.
And I did that real quick. Let me talk. Honestly, if I was standing in front of the governor, and some of you may, at first, I first would say thank you. I would, honestly, this governor, because I truly believe this governor has done more than any other governor in this country, right? And everybody here, we knows we could rattle that off. Operation Lone Star. If you haven't, I really encourage you, go to their website. It's right there. The statistical accomplishments from a law enforcement perspective with respect to Operation Lone Star, it's unfathomable how successful that's been. However, after I would say, shake his hand, I would say thank you very sincerely, full stop. The other thing that I would say is, though, let's continue to have the discussion on the constitutional issue, right? Article 1, Section 10, Article 4, Section 4. That is still alive and well. It's still a real thing. He's declared the invasion. The water barrier lawsuit, and part of that, the alternative, argument was they were talking about this, right? The constitutionality of what they're doing. Unfortunately, that lawsuit was more focused on the Water Act statute rather than the constitutional issue. But with this and now the concertina wire and that, I'm hoping it's going to come to a head. I'm hoping that's by design. It's going to get to the Supreme Court, and that constitutional issue is going to get there. Because if we can address that constitutional issue, right, and it's solid that under the self-help remedy, the state of Texas now has a vast set of additional tools available to them that could potentially change the game. And to change the game this way, remove. And I know there's some legislation going on. There's some challenges with it, right, actually what that means. But until we actually, and here's the part that sucks, right, is the states, they should not have to be doing any of this. This is stupid, right? The state should not be doing this. And so to some degree, I know we can fall in that trap, well, it's not enough. Well, he's doing, but it's not enough. I'd say be careful about that, right? Because the threat is in an untenable, the states are in an untenable position. They're being put in a position they should not have to. This is the federal government's responsibility, full stop, full stop. They're not doing it. And so now the states are thrust into this untenable position. And one of the issues that's very real, and there's legal scholars that go back and forth, is if a National Guard or state trooper actually takes an illegal alien and pushes them across the Mexico side, that they could actually be personally liable, both civilly and criminally. We can't dismiss that. Even though, and I'm on the side, I think that's minimal, but others see it as it's greater. So what I would just suggest is keep on, right? Let's keep that discussion. Everybody in here, I would continue to push that constitutional discussion further to see if we can actually get to where we need to be. Because if we can start actually removing people, you'll see the flow go down. History proves that.
Thank you all so much for sharing. There was a lot of discussion earlier about our need to stop cartel and drug operations, and I was wondering if we could outline some specific ways on the federal level, but also specifically here in Texas on the state level, that we could do a better job of kind of attacking those sources.
Yeah, I think on the federal level, as I said, I think our capacities as far as financial intelligence are completely underfunded and insignificant to the task. So we need to really bolster our capacities on that front to identify not only what's going on as far as global transactions, but a lot of these transactions and this illicit wealth is in the United States. It's in Texas, it's in Miami. A lot of those mega mansions that you see are bought with narco money, and that's a holding area for a lot of illicit wealth, and that facilitates this broader illegal activity around the. We can't stop this movement, the physical movement of drugs and people, then the financial is going to only ever get a fraction of that, you know? So you really got to attack it on both ends. And that's why I think it's really important what's being done here in Texas on that front.
Yeah, to add to that, again, two gentlemen back there, Mike and Rodney, will tell you the basic tenement Border Patrol developed a long time ago, the multi-layer strategy, infrastructure, technology, and personnel. Anywhere where you apply that in strategic locations, all three of those elements of that strategy, every single measure of success improves. So I just want to foot stop that. But the other thing is, nationally, big Army, big DOD, they have to step up and realize that protecting our own borders is just as important as protecting other nations' borders, right? And it's not there. I can tell you, even under the Trump administration, it wasn't there, right? There is still this narrative that's out there across the country that's what happened at our borders about immigration. And so nobody wants to touch that, right? You have sheriffs in Texas that feel that way, right? Right now, there's some legislation going on that sheriffs are pushing back on because they say, I don't want to be in the immigration business. What? It's not about immigration. What's happening is about border security. Again, 1.7 million known gotaways every single day. Murderers, rapists, pedophiles, aggravated felons, and gang members are pouring across our border every single day. Aliens on the terror watch list are pouring across our border. Every single day, special interest aliens from countries that harbor, sponsor, and facilitate terrorism are coming across our border every single day. It's not about immigration. It's about border security. Wake the hell up, right? And so big DOD, right, has to step up and acknowledge and accept that their mission is also to secure our borders. And that's going to be a key fundamental aspect of this. We're going to have to shore up both our policy and our infrastructure on the physical border. We're going to have to change how we go after the cartels, and we need big army to understand that their job is also to protect our borders as well.
I think we've got time for one more question.
We talked earlier this morning about the role of legal trade. So, Mark, your intelligence, your insights, we need to recognize that the cartels extort legal trade. What percentage of that would you say is their take, crossing the bridges? We know there's $700 billion of legal trade taking place. We fool ourselves to think the cartels do not get a cut of that. If we want to grow trade with Mexico, we need to have an honest assessment of how much of that money goes into the pockets of the criminals who are coming at us. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And again, Roddy, Mike, you guys can jump in here. The answer is we don't know, right? We don't know how much they're profiting from that, right? That's the answer. I'll give you an example. So a conveyance is coming across our border. Congress passed a law years ago saying we're supposed to get to 100% of inspection of conveyances coming across. We're not anywhere near that, right, through our ports. I think it's, Rodney, Mike, do you guys, I think it's like 10%, 15%. It's something really low, right? So yeah, that's happening. But this is one where let's not, so when we say border security is synonymous with national security, right, and our safety, it's not just about the cartels as well. Let's look at China, right? I mean, they're some of the biggest violators, right, of counterproliferation. It goes on and on, right? So there's some real issues there as well. I mean, in the last 34 months, the number of Chinese nationals that have crossed our border has skyrocketed. Do you know why? I don't, because this government's not telling us. I have no idea. But you know what? That shouldn't make us feel good. So when we say national security threat, and when we say what the cartels are doing, it's a multi-layered issue. And so I go back. When we look at the economy, we have to know that the trade is actually being exploited, right? So when we look at trade, it's not okay, we have border security and then we have trade over here. Like trade is all good. No, it's not. It's a cluster. It's an issue, you know? Now look, I know I come across doom and gloom. Part of that's because I believe that. But when it comes to our ports of entry, though, we've done an incredible job. We have. I mean, on the OFO side that handles the ports, the National Targeting Center, I mean, I could go on and on what they've done. So we've done some incredible things. But to sit here and say that it's not being exploited, we're living in a dream world. We're not infallible. It's happening every single day. They're exploiting the entire southwest border. There's an old saying that says that nothing or no one crosses the border without the cartels profiting from it, right?
Thank you all for your questions. Before we finish, I want to know, I'm not sure if he's still testifying, but this morning Secretary Mayorkas was testifying in the Senate. Our friend Chad Wolf over at AFPI sent over a message saying that he continues to talk about managing the crisis, but not solving it. He said the asylum backlog would go away if only there was amnesty. So let's say we're in 2024, new president gets elected. You're each appointed his special advisors to Mexico for the entire country. In one or two sentences max, what would you tell him he needed to immediately do? Simon, I'll start with you.
Well, that's obviously a fiction because you would get rid of the backlog and then tomorrow it would start growing again. It's never going to go away. The demand is insatiable. You have to reform the asylum system. You've got to return it to what it was meant to be. It's not for people who don't have a good job. It's not for people who are threatened by crime in their neighborhood. There are specific requirements that we are ignoring. So number one would be reform the whole credible fear asylum structure and have people wait outside the United States or go into the refugee process, which has been basically abandoned, if they want to come into the United States through that route and not through a legal visa.
Yeah, I think as far as Mexico, you have to, again, put pressure on the Mexican government to act because that action isn't going to come from within. And part of being able to do that is securing our border, because as long as you rely on other governments to handle migration for you, you're always going to have your national security at risk and your other priorities left aside as you have to accommodate the different focus and different preferences of other governments in order to maintain that security. So we need to stop that reliance and exert that pressure.
2 sentences will be tough for me. First,
The rule was only for you.
First, I would file criminal charges against Secretary Mayorkas, hoping that he goes to jail. 2, I declare a national emergency. I deploy the United States military down to physically secure our border, and I would fundamentally change and go out.
To the theater, to upstairs on the 6th floor for lunch, which will begin at noon, I believe. And I realize I didn't start off the panel by introducing myself, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Selene Rodriguez. I'm a policy director for our Secure and Sovereign Frontier campaign, and thank you guys so much for everything you're doing and for joining us today.